Okay, so we're supposed to be doing the Gemara today in Yudam Beis. We have a lot to do because we're on Yudam and Aleph. Excuse me. So let's get moving. So we're up to the two dots in the wide lines on Yud, about 10 lines down. Tana Rabbanan. Yes, Dr. Gemara, Tana Rabbanan. Eretz Mitzrayim, Havya Dal Meis Parsa, Dal Meis Parsa. Eretz Mitzrayim is 400 Parsa on 400 Parsa. It's interesting because we talk about this kind of a lashon of I think Arba Parsa, the beginning of Megillah when they translate over the Torah on Gimel. I think it says the land of Israel shook 400 parsa on 400 parsa. I have to double check. Yeah. So they're saying Eretz Mitzrayim is that size. I'm not really sure what that means. Eretz Mitzrayim is way larger than Eretz Yisrael. Yeah. So it says the Gemara that 400 parsa by 400 parsa, whatever that size is, who echam mishishim bekush. That is 1/60th of Kush. Kush, exactly where it is, I don't know, but if it's thought of as a major area within Africa, there's a lot of room there for that, for sure. The Kush, and Kush, however large it is, right? It's 1/60th of the world. The world is 1/60th of the garden, meaning the Garden of Eden. And the Gan is 1/60th of Eden. For those who remember in Brachas, we had the Gemara in Brachas told us in Lamed Daled, the Gemara told us, based upon the pasuk says, "V'nahar yotzei me'eden lahashkos es hagan, u'misham yipared v'haya la'arba arashim." Right? What did that mean? V'nahar yotzei me'eden lahashkos es hagan. Says the Gemara, gan lachud, ve'eden lachud. They're two separate things. Don't think it's just because we say Gan Eden, it's one thing. No, it's two separate things. The Rishon was only ever in the Gan. He never was in Eden. Yeah. The Eden Echa Mishishim Leganim. So again, Gehenim is massive. That doesn't bode well. But it's way bigger than the world. Says the Gemara. The whole world is basically like a pot cover of Gehenim, meaning Gehenim is way, way bigger than everything else. Yeshem Gehenim and Lashir. Those that say, yeah, Gehenim actually has no size. It's that large. Yeshem Eden and Lashir. And those that say that Eden doesn't have a shear. Again, and this first thing that we just learned, it does have a shear. It's more than Gehenim. Yeah. Amr Abaishya. Ma'ida Sif Shechenes Al Mayim Rabim. Rabbis Eitzaris. Right. Pasuk says, Shechenes Al Mayim Rabim. It's residing on many waters. Rabbis Eitzaris. It has a lot in its storehouses. Mi Garm Lebavel Shiu Eitzarisei Ameleas Bar. What causes Bavel to have such a massive windfall that it has storehouses full of grain? I will suggest to you that the reason is because it is residing on many waters. In other words, the fact that it has abundant water, that is a big benefit to it. Amarav, Asira, Rashi here says Asira, Rashi puts on a shin, like Ashira. Bavel is rich. Asira Bavel, the Chatzta Mitra, because it could literally have a successful harvest without rain. Right? Because of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and Mamish has the ability to access water without it having to rain. And of course it has to rain. I don't know where the Tigris and Euphrates get their waters from. I assume maybe there's some underground springs, but there's probably also mountains that are, melting and the water is getting into these rivers. So somewhere in the back, there is a need for water, but from their perspective, living at the end of the Tigris and Euphrates bubbles to the south of Iraq, as the Tigris and Euphrates have come a very long way until they got to where they are in Babel, and at that point it's going to go into the ocean. So there they're able to be taking off canals and making essentially life a very easy life, because for them the water seems to always be there. They don't need rain. It's better to have swamps than it is to have dry. That's what Abaya says. Now, I don't know exactly what the story in southern Iraq is today, but I do know that back in the 1990s, yeah. So there was the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War. The first Gulf War was, I believe, in 1990. and the second Gulf War was in 2003. The first Gulf War in 1990, um, the the reason was because Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, and whatever, whole oil, this, whatever, it's not important. The purpose is now. So basically, Saddam Hussein was very angry at the fact that he had disloyal people who didn't like him. He was a Sunni Ba'athist, so his support came from sort of the middle of Iraq. But the northern part of Iraq is Kurds, and the Kurds are a different ethnicity. They may be Muslim, but they're different ethnicity, so they don't see eye to eye. They want basically a free Kurdistan. And the people in the southern part of Iraq, they're very heavily Shia, and Shia is a competing type of Islam to Sunni. And also in southern Iraq, they had something called Marsh Arabs. And basically, southern part of Iraq was what you imagine the Everglades in Florida. The whole thing was marshlands. And what he did was he put poison gas, like he killed hundreds of thousands of his own citizens, and he drained the swamps. So think of this Gemara here, right? During the times of Abaya, and what they've been trying to do since Saddam Hussein is gone is to try to re-irrigate. I'm not sure how you do it, but now they have areas now today in southern Iraq that are again marshes. They're trying to again bring back that kind of abundance. But that's how it was then. Life for them was very different than just the total desert that we associate today. The swampland is better than dry land. Yeah. Correct. Why did we say that? Because that's where they would have to grow. That's how they would have to. That's how the growing was with them. They had very swampy land. It was easy to irrigate. All right, so now up to the Mishnah. Yeah, so it's up to the Mishnah. The Gimel Mar Cheshvan Shalom Sakishamim. We already had this before, right? When do you start saying the same Talamat of Bracha? So one man Amar says you say it on the third day of Cheshvan. Gamliel says you say on the seventh. Why? Because Tesvav Yom Achar Chag. If you do the math, it's basically 15 days after Sukkot. Kadesh Yigiyah Achar Shavi Yisrael in Nahar Paras. In order to be able to give an opportunity for even the last one to get back to Nahar Paras. They get back to Nahar Paras. What do you mean? Why are they going to Nahar Paras? What are we talking about in this Mishnah? Who's Rabbi Gamliel? Rabbi Gamliel, let's assume this is not Rabbi Gamliel has Zaken, because Rabbi Gamliel has Zaken, usually in the Mishnah, they're bringing him down, they'll say Rabbi Gamliel has Zaken. So we're talking about the main Rabbi Gamliel, right? Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne. Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne becomes the Nasi when? After the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. Right? Who was the Nasi when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. So we're talking about Rabbi Gamliel, who was alive, obviously, probably was the Beis Hamikdash, but he wasn't yet the Nasi. Right? It was within their family, the Hillel family, but Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai is not part of the Hillel family. Whether or not he was a Kohen is a whole other thing. So Rabbi Gamliel becomes the Nasi after Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai passed away. So we're talking about already after the Churban. So the question is, what do you mean? When is this halakha developed? Rabbi Gamliel is saying you have to on the seventh day of Cheshvan in order to be able to let all the Regalim go back. So if you look here in the back, right? So the Ran suggests that maybe what we're dealing with is a situation where let's see, the Ran, yeah, it's on Beis Amud Aleph. Beis Amud Aleph in the back of on the Daf Arif, at least in mine. So he says, "V'ikol mei lechacha." Right, pasuk. Rabbi Lezer halach Rabbi Gamliel dahar Rabbi Gamliel lo amar hachi elam nei takanosin shel regalim. So idna basar churban lekal mefish lekantayu. Why do I have to worry about such a takana after the churban of the Beis Hamikdash? There's no more Beis Hamikdash, so pasha, right? I don't need to have a takana says you should do it on Zayim Mar Cheshvan. There's no more other regalim. So why do we say it then? Maybe you want to say, look, in the future, he's telling us like this is how it should be, and there's something to be built. We call it Hilchos Mashiach. Who cares? Like this is not our relevant time. He says like this. We can say, Shabbat Paskin Alach Gamliel, Shekevin Shehuk Bazman Zel of Eretz Yisrael, Af Kol Mi Yirem and Yiras Hageshamim, Mishum Peres Davar Chetzboy, Me'achman Hashe'el Hashem Cheshvan. Except the Chidushai, Shenir Medukdak Sugis Gemara, the Ba'asra the less Luper B'Davar, Ve'enim Mokum to V'ani, El Tzork Sham Kigan Artzishol, Shalom Tekef Achar Achag. Because I've already written, I think, that if you need the water earlier than Zayim Mar Cheshvan, because guess what? You don't have you have needs for water, and there's no more oile regular you have to be worried about. So he said, I think you could ask for it earlier. Take it back right after Sukkot. Remember I told you we're going to hit the Sukkah? Well, I wasn't planning on doing it today too much, but here is one place we could hit it. We could hit it in another place in a few blocks. Then inside, Mersha Kolman Kemis Shovel Laskar. Right? He says, I think that with regards to other places outside of Eretz Yisrael, Shekol HaMekemes Shaves, they're all equal. Laskar Miyantif Achim Shachag. Right after the last day of Sukkot, but with regards to She'ela, right, Haskar is maybe one thing. Mashav is maybe the same din, but She'ela is maybe different compared to the different places. Right? Maybe outside of Eretz Yisrael, when it comes to She'ela of Saint Talmud, you should do it differently in different places. Avol, he says, what should I do? But the Rav Alphas like Hiski B'il Chaysav. But Rav Alphas didn't write this. He didn't make any distinctions to the Rif. So the Ran saying, I think this is what the law should be. But the Rif didn't say anything about it. Yeah. So I just wanted to say one other point, which is, I will admit if I don't get to this tonight, I'll say it now. It says, the Chi Afsike Helchsa Kerb Gamliel, Hainu Afilu La'achar Churban, Lafi Shahayim Mis'as V'Mechol Asvivis Beregel Yerushalayim, Mosh Eisen Gam Hayom. That is super duper key to me, right? Right topic tonight. You hear that? That what do? They're Be'oile Regel when? After the Churban. Not just that. What did he say? When is he writing? This is the 1300. Gam Hayayim. They're still being Euler Regel. Gam Hayayim. This is very, very relevant for me for tonight. I'm glad I reminded myself about it. So, this is monumental, right? Because essentially he's talking about okay, I don't want to get into this topic. Take the rest of the shit, right? That is my topic for tonight. So that's the shout out, right? The fundamental idea about whether or not you're allowed to go to the Harabayis. Here I have an unbelievable proof from the Ran that this was happening when? 1300s. Clear? Clear as day. No doubt about it. But our topic for the moment, which we don't want to get lost on, is the fact that they're doing the She'ela of the Saint Talmud when? On the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. Why? Because of Euler Regel. What you're saying that applies even? Bisman has there's no Euler Regel. Or maybe there were, because the Ran says that there were even after. Fine. So says the Gemara, that we do it on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. Tanya Chanina Eimer. Chanina says, one second. This idea of doing a Zayim Mar Cheshvan, that's true in Eretz Yisrael. But B'chutz La'aretz u'B'Gaila, does he say that there's different areas within the Galus? No. He just says U'V'Gaila, which, again, the Ran pointed out, maybe we should have different areas within the Gaila for She'ela. Maybe for Askar it'll be the same with Semash Baruch at the same time, but maybe for She'ela we should have different times depending on what we need. In fact, the Shulchan Gebarim wants to bring it down the rush, and they all wanted to try to make the She'ela be at different times. It didn't work. But nevertheless, for our purposes now, Chanina, remember Chanina from the Gemara told us in Bracha Samach Gimel, he went down from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. And why did he go down? Maybe we discussed that at the time, complicated the matters, maybe at the situations he ran into in terms of the minas, the government, whatever. Somehow he ends up in Bavel. And he's being Kaveh Chadashim, he's being Kaveh a calendar. And remember they sent down two Tamil Chacham and they said to him, listen, buddy, if you don't change your practice and stop being Kaveh, then we're going to be putting you in Nidoi. And he says, whoa, I wasn't Haniach Kamaisi in Eretz Yisrael. He said, no. Izim with Nasam Tiyashim. The little goats that you left behind were now big rams. We can ram you. Just remember, stop doing this. And he stops. But the doesn't give up so easily. He says, but wasn't I Rabbi Kiva there? So Rabbi Kiva wasn't Niach Kamaisa. So, but I also wasn't. He says, no, he's not from Hashem. Today there are people like you. You're not that great. Rabbi Kiva, it's true. There was nobody like him, and he could do it. But by you, not so great. Better stop. Although we're going to have two basic, remember like the Mishnah told us about Shana, about Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Shua, you can't have two calendars or be finished as a people. Only one calendar. So Chanina says that when do you start saying V'sein Talamad Levracha? 60 days after the Tekufa. No, what's 60 days after the Tekufa? I'm not a good mathematician. But you know what 60 days after the Tekufa is? The Tekufa is the autumnal equinox, right? You have an autumnal and a spring equinox. You have two equinoxes, right? The times when the day is basically closest to being the same. Yeah? So, is that December 4th? Count 60 days from the autumnal equinox. Is that December 4th? You'll do the math later. It's not. I'm going to save you the time. So how did it get to be 60 days after, which is going to come out usually in November? How do we get December 4th? Like an extra 13 days. The answer has to do with the calendar, basically the Julian versus the Gregorian calendars. I don't want to get into more now other than to say that the basic idea is this. Our day is not 365 and a quarter days. It's not exact, right? It's actually a little bit more, a little bit less, like it's a little off. It's about off between the two, between the actual day and what we have as a calendar is 365 and a quarter days, right? And that's why we have the sometimes leap year for the February. Now, this is the only thing that we do that has to do with really the sun. Right? The Birkas Lacham bit is not really the sun. We talked about that in Baruch. I'm not getting into that again now. This is the only thing that has to do mamish with the sun, right? The actual solar day, the solar year. That's the only thing. Same time on the problem. So, if it's off by 12 or 13 minutes a day or so, a year, I apologize. 12, 13 minutes a year, not a day. Over a period of years, you're going to end up in a situation where what? Your day, your calendar is not matching your year. And the Pope realized that, I think it's the 1500s, when they changed from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. And they basically just chopped off and said, this is it. This is what it is now. And now they're able to sort of respond. We never responded. In other words, the Jewish calendar didn't change. So we're still calculating it the same way. And therefore for us, if you count the amount of difference, the lag, right, this extra bit of 12, 13 minutes a year, every year, over a period, imagine, of hundreds of years, you end up, it's going to be off from the other calendar. That's why we're now at December 4th. If we're not having Mashiach and some 500 years, we wouldn't be doing it December 4th, and it would be another date, and it'll be, again, account for this lag. But in theory, we're still doing it 60 days after the Tkufa. We would have to change again, yeah, to account for the time. All right, let's go. So says the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna bar Chia. So this is amazing, right? Because where Rav Huna bar Chia says what? In the name of Shmuel, Allah Chanina. Right? So even though before we said that Chanina, we're warning you better stop being Ma'aber Shana, you better stop with your calendar stuff, because we have now big rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, but we do take him for the halacha in Golas. But when we start saying the same Talmud Bracha, that we do. We don't do it 7 day of Cheshvan. We do it 60 days after the Tkufa. Okay, so says the Gemara. Eini v'haboy minei Shmuel. But is this really true? They asked Shmuel. You're saying Shmuel said that like Chanina, but they asked Shmuel me'emasai mad kirinon v'sein talmud. They asked Shmuel when you start saying v'sein talmud levracha, and he said Amalu mechima ayeli sivi lebeit tavas rishba. Right, when they start bringing the wood into the Beit Tavas, Rishba is not 100% clear. Look at Rashi, he says one thing. Look at the Aruch, he says something else. We'll go with the Aruch here for the moment. The Aruch seems to be saying that it's basically like an acronym for Reish Beis Av. Right, that's something. The Beit Tavas was the Reish Beis Av. He's a big important guy. So you see, it's a different date. Doesn't sound like 60 days after the Tkufa. It sounds like when they bring the wood into the house of the Tavas, who's the Rishba. It's not a question. Maybe he's just giving a sign, right? The sign is that when you bring in the wood in the house of the Beit Tavis, but fundamentally, when is that time? That time is 60 days after the Tekufa. Good. The Gemara doesn't challenge that. Okay, it could be at the same time. Shmuel says the Chanina, and he says that the sign of that is when they bring the wood into the house of Beit Tavis. This 60th day that we say, the 60th day, like, it's like an annoying kind of question, but you have to know, technically, is the 60th day part of the count? Right? Or is it after? In other words, if it's before you start saying Talmud Levracha, so then it will be right ad v'lo abacha. You don't include it in. But if it's if it's already part of that thing, then now it's already considered 60 days. Then you start saying Talmud on the 60th day. And that's the more question. More the machlokes about it. More tashma. Rav Amar Shishim Kilach Shishim. So 6 days like after the 6 days, meaning it's already going to start saying the same Talmud Levracha. Or Shmuel Amar Yem Shishim Levnei Shishim. No, that 60 days is still considered part of the 60 days, meaning you still have to wait. You're not going to say the same Talmud Levracha until afterwards. Aber Menachem Yitzchak v'Simanech. Menachem Yitzchak gives you a sign to understand this. He says, "Eloi boy Maya." Right? Those who live up the river, those who live on the higher, they don't need the water, right? I'm sorry. The ones who live on the high, they need the water. But the ones who live at Tatoy, they don't need the water. Why? Because the water's coming down to them by gravity. The water's always coming down to them. Yeah, but we actually paskin in this situation like Rav. It's a situation of we go with Rav and Issa Heter, we go Shmuel and Mammon. This is probably sort of an Issa Heter, so we paskin like Rav that the Yom Shishim is called Achashishim, meaning that when you get to the 60th day, you start saying V'Sem Talmud on that day itself. We have to learn very important Rashi before we move on, and that is the last Rashi here before the Mishnah. Rashi says that the ones right the ones Eloi they need the water, right? Right. Why is that? Because they're in the harm, they're in the mountains. Because the water doesn't stay by them; it's constantly with gravity going further down. The ones who live below don't need water. Because waters go from on high to the valleys; they go down. So right, that's how you get lakes, right? It's very hard to find lakes very high up. There are very rarely, very interesting that there are lakes mamish high up in the mountains, but the lakes are usually down below. The water comes down from the mountains, goes into the rivers, and eventually comes into a lake. Yeah. So Rashi says that the ones below don't need it. Wash them all the waters from the mountains they come into the valleys, and so they're good. So why is Rav saying what he said? That he says that the 60th day is Kalach Hashishi, meaning you have to start saying Santa Alamot Levracha, is because Rav is from Eretz Yisrael. That the Chamin Baum, like we always say many times, Rav, right? When Rav came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. Eretz Yisrael Gevaya Mikol Eretz Yisrael is higher than all the other lands. Mishum Hachi Amar Kalach Hashish. That's what we say. Rav's position was that it's after 60. Why? Meaning because he wants you to say the same Talmud Levrach as early as possible. So the 60th day is not part of the minyan, you wouldn't be saying it. Right? You'd be saying it the next day. So Rav was from Eretz Yisrael, living in a land that's very high. Right? If the Pasuk says about it, Eretz, right? We say, it's not like Mitzrayim, the Pasuk says. Like Eretz Mitzrayim here, Asher Yitzos Misham, right? Because there's some Ganarova, it's easy to get water. Right? But Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Harim Levakoyos, the Matara Shamayim Tish Demayim, right? It's very hard to get water into Eretz Yisrael, the land of hills and valleys. So therefore, Rav, that's what the Shishim is called, Acha Shishim, and then he starts saying Talmud Levrach on the 60th day itself. And because Bubble, as you just saw, lives in Mamish swampy marshland, Mamish a lot of water everywhere available. So in Shaila at Zion at Samach at Skufas Tishrei, you don't have to start saying Saint Talmud until Skufas Tishrei, until 6 days after Skufas Tishrei, which again, as we said, comes out to today, what we call December 4th, but it's really not. It's just the confluence of the calendars. Yeah. So that's why we're not. That's why we're not doing it earlier in November because of the fact that what we're sort of calculating it based upon is a situation of, as we said, the calendar that we use, this sort of Julian calendar, is obviously not correct. And we don't have a way of accounting for it, so that's why we have to add in these extra days in order to get to it's 13 odd days or whatever that we're off because of the fact that the time lag. Yeah. And look at the last line. That's what I want this. There's so many things in this Rashi to discuss. Right. Number one, the idea that Eretz Yisrael is Gevayim Mikol Aratzos. Right. In a spiritual sense, sure, but this is not in a spiritual sense. It's in a literal sense. In a literal sense, again, I'll be part of the topic for tonight. Maybe I'll touch on this as well. In terms of this other aspect about that's essentially being said here is that Rav comes up with the opinion of Shishim because it's from Eretz Yisrael, which has high. You're essentially saying that his logic was based upon his reality, right? Which is a very interesting topic. I can't really get into that now. How much people get affected by their halachic decisions based upon what is their perceived reality. Is that Rav's reality in Bava? Why didn't he change his mind when he got to Bava? He's making a decision what was true in Eretz Yisrael for Bava. Why? And then the last line of Rashi, which is very, very, very important, we do this. Again, we don't know if this is Rashi. Assume for the moment that this is Rashi's students from this area of Rashi. So we're talking about in France, in the medieval era, right, in the 1000, 1100 time. What's he saying? All of our minhagim come after Bavel, so that's when we do it also. This, again, becomes a very interesting topic because sometimes we find that there are certain minhagim in Ashkenaz that are very much for sure based upon not Bavel, based upon minig of Eretz Yisrael. Which minig trumped in Europe? You would think Eretz Yisrael is a lot closer to Bavel. Eretz Yisrael is a lot closer to Europe and should potentially be more having an effect rather than Bavel, but it's actually not true. And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes, like I said, we can find situations where it's not like this, where you don't say, oh, the meaning of after Bavel, no, we go after Eretz Yisrael. But clearly here, not that way. All right, we got to move. So says the Mishnah. What happens if the 17th day of Cheshvan comes about and there's no rain? So it's Chila Echidim Asanin. The Echidim have to start fasting. Gimel Tani has 3 fasts. They can eat and drink at night. All those things that would normally be Aser, right, on a major fast like Yom Kippur or Tisha B'Av, that's not Aser. He gave Rosh Chodesh Kislev. What happens if it came to Rosh Chodesh Kislev? So in other words, already a whole Cheshvan went by, there was no rain. Now it's Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which remember we said before, that's like the end of the first rains should already be happening already by the time of Kislev. So if Rosh Chodesh Kislev came and there hadn't been any rain, so Beis Din goes and Shalish Taniyas al Tzibur. Beis Din then makes 3 Taniyas on the Tzibur, not just on the Yachid, right? On the Tzibur, now they have to fast. And again, the same laws. They're allowed to eat and drink from when it gets dark. And we turn Malacha, Merchitza, Vashikon, that's the sound of Tasha Shmita. In other words, they're not fast. They start the night before and they go all day. They start in the morning and they go the end of the day. But you're still mutter on all these other things. Now, us in the 5, Chamisha, kind of things that you have to be worried about. And you're able to work, etc. Fine. So, effectively, more my yechidim. What is like yechidim? The yachid. We've talked about this before, right? That there are special people who could lead the town. So here we have it. So it's the Rav Huna Rabbanan. The yechidim are the rabbis. Rav Huna and Rav Huna says yechidim is anish shlosh taniyos shenim chamishi v'sheni. Right? Sort of like a bahab that we have in the morning of kedushin. Right? How did that get started? After the holidays, it got started because of mixing inappropriately during the holidays of the men and the women. So they had mahab. That's one of the answers Tais gives. Yeah. So here is the same idea, right? We do a Monday, Thursday, and a Monday. It says the Marmaikim Ashkelon. What's your big chiddush? You're telling me that you do the fast on Monday, Thursday, Monday. Tanina, I already know why. And goes you don't make the first fast for a tzibah on the Thursday. And not to make the prices go up because everybody's going to be going out to buy stuff on Friday, right? Why? Because number one, they're hungry, and number two, Shabbos. Remember, we already had about Rashi. They go to the shuk on Fridays to go buy stuff, right? So what happens when you have a lot of demand? Prices go up. So you're not allowed to make the first fast. Then you have to make it on a Monday, so you can sort of adjust everything to the reality of the fasting. So Tanina and goes to Tanis al Tzibur Chil B'Chamish Yishol Have Ges Hashem. Ela Shorish Taniyas Av Yishon Shenim V'Chamish Yishon. The way you do it is you do Monday, Thursday, Monday. So what are you telling me now? So make chiddush. I know. Says the one, no. Ma'od the Tema Hani Milit Tzibur Aval Yachad Lai. Because you might have thought what? You might have thought that's with relation to a tzibur. That tzibur, we say, has to start on Thursday. I'm sorry, Monday. It cannot start on Thursday. But when we're dealing with yechidim, when you're dealing with literally who was staying fast in the beginning. Not the tzibur, it's the yechidim. So individuals, so then maybe let them fast on a Thursday first. What's the problem? It's not going to make the prices go up because it's a yachid. It's not going to be a run on the, a big run on the, I don't know, what do people eat after breaking fast? My kids, they eat cereal. I never heard. You have soup after a fast. That's all I ever know. Right? Cereal. Yeah. Fine. My wife likes to have a bagel. Bagel. Yeah. These are like things like I'm in like America. So I don't know what you go out and what you would go out run to the store. But whatever people would run to the store for, you only eat them. A few people, a few rabbis. So they're the only ones fasting. What's the big deal? Does them or no? I would have thought it's any milat tzibur b'yachal like kamash. Well, no, it's even by the tzibur. Tanya nam yachal being around like this because it's sila echidim l'sanais. When the echidim start to fast, l'sanas sheni v'chamish v'sheni u'mafsikim b'rosh chodashim. Right, when they start to do the fasting, when is that? Right, they start on a Monday, and this is a brayso very very clear because it says the echidim start on a Monday, and if there would be a Rosh Chodesh or something that came about, then they obviously they wouldn't fast on that day. Okay, now we turn the page to Yud Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Umayam Tevim. Hakesuvim Megillas Taanit. For those who've been with us on Sunday mornings, you love this line of the Gemara, right? Because what does it say? And the Yom Tevim that are written in Megillas Taanit. Written in Megillas Taanit. Because remember, that's what we have said, was that there was one thing that was written in Teresh Bapeh before everything else. And that is what? Megillas Taanit. And we have it here. It's gorgeous. We mamish have it here. Right? That the Megillah Taanit is all written down. So what we just said about when the Yachidim are not going to be fasting, they're not going to be fasting on Chodesh, and if it's a special holiday, it was written in Megillah Taanit. Again, Megillah Taanit has a list where you don't fast, but also there are different versions of it. Also has additional information as well. Yeah. All right. So Zad the Gemara Tana Rabbanan Al Yemer Adam Talmudani and Aini Roy Elias Yachid. So for somebody shouldn't be such a modest and humble guy. Say, listen, I'm just a Talmud. I'm not right to be a Yachid. I'm not right to fast. All the Talmud Chacham are considered Yachidim, and they should all be fasting. Ezu Yachid, Ve'ezu Talmud. So more so, okay, what exactly is the difference? What is the level of a Talmud? What's the level of a Yachid? Let's understand. Says the Gemara, Yachid kol shavar l'nosi parnas alat tzibur. A Yachid is somebody who's right to become the parnas. Right, he's ready to become the leader of the congregation. Talmud, right? That's the Gemara tells in the Kedushin, right? If somebody's saying about himself that he's a big knacker, so to get married, he has to be able to answer you anyway, even Mesachas Kala, right? Different understandings than the Rishonim there in Kedushin about that. But we're talking about somebody who's a serious learner. Tesis is bothered by this in the top Tesis. We don't have time to do it now. Tesis really. Because we have other the definitions, it seems like in other places. And it sounds like a Talmud here knows everything. So what are you talking about? So basically ends up coming out that's saying that a Rebbe is somebody who can answer all the Talmidim wherever they're asking. But if you can only answer the Masechta that you're learning, so then you're not really a Rebbe, you're a Talmud. That's Tesis. Yeah. But anyhow, for our purposes now, we're trying to figure out what's a Yachid, right? What's a Talmud? So the Gemara says that a Yachid is somebody who could be a Parnas. A Talmud is anybody who they're going to ask him about halacha, and ask him about his learning, and he could tell them anywhere, right? I mean, this is a very high bar. If a guy can answer you anywhere, and Masechta Skala, and he's just a Talmud. Remember we talked about before? I think we talked about the drift, right? We talked about the drift today about Saint Talmud of the Baruch, the 7 before to count the Julian Gregorian. There's also a drift in the word Talmud. I told you that the way the word Talmud Chacham was once used was literally as a Talmud. It wasn't such a great person. A Chacham was the great title. Here we're saying a Talmud. Someone else called her Kula. He can answer you everywhere. Right? It's a very high bar to hit a Talmud. Yeah. The Tana Rabbanan. Not everybody wants to become a Yachid, is able to make himself that. Right? Right. Like remember we had a line like this in Brachas. Right? Everything comes back to Brachas. What do we have in Brachas? We had over there Mishnah. Mishnah told us a situation about Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel. Yeah, right. Remember the Mishnah said that somebody who's getting married, he's marrying, for the first time, Basula, so he doesn't have to say Shema. Right? We say Shema because Shulchan says we don't have to kavanah anytime, so it's not a problem. We can say Shema when we get married. But in those days, right, people had kavanah, so they didn't say Shema when they got married because they're busy. Torah is a mitzvah. Right? So they're saying Avelos, whatever. So in that situation over there, So people want to say Shema, and then the Mishnah says, "Loi kol haroitze lito es Hashem ito." Not everybody who wants to take the name of Hashem can take it, right? You think you're ready? You're able to have kavanah. Not everybody's there to have kavanah. So we have the same kind of idea. Not everybody wants to become a yachid, is able to make himself into a yachid, right? Or Talmud is able to make himself into a Talmud. The Ramer, Rabbi Yossi is more, he's more makeline. He says that you should be making yourself into a Talmud, into somebody who would be having applicability to fast. It's not a bad thing. Why? Right? We're going to be more talented if you want to become a Talmud, you want to become a yachid, you want to fast. Why? Because you're essentially taking it on just to fast, to help out the congregation, to daven. We're making on you on this. You're not doing anything bad out of the ordinary. Taanit, another similar Bryce that says the same thing. Look, Talmud. Not everybody could make himself into a Talmud or a Yachid. They were Shimon Elazar. No, that we say you can't make yourself into a Yachid, Talmud, like don't make yourself bigger than your station. That's only about things that are going to give you honor, praise, things that are going to help you out in life. But for things of pain, take on the fast for the tzibur. No problem. Take it on. That's not an issue. We're not worried about people having mechzi kiyara, that they're fasting too much. We'll allow it. But you want the accoutrements of being the rabbi. You want to be called a rabbi. You want to, have a title. You want to get off on taxes. You want all the benefits of it. No, that not so fast. Right there, we'll give you a fair. Right. So says the Gemara. What happens if somebody was fasting for a tzara and it passed? The tzara stopped. Right? If somebody was again fasting for somebody who's a sick person and he got better. No, he should finish the fast. Right? Don't stop the fast that day. Finish the fast and then you're done. What happens if you're in a place that does not fasting for whatever reason you're not fasting? Then you come to a town where they're fasting. You have to fast with them, right? You have to fast with them. What happens if you're coming from a place where they're fasting and you're traveling and now you get to a town where they're not fasting? You have to fast your own fast. You have to finish it. Right. This also comes back to brachas. Remember, we had a whole thing about Tisha B'av. Right? If Isam Malacha, not Isam Malacha, the places. Right, we talked about this kind of a topic over there, but we're basically saying if you have a private fast, if you were coming from a town where they were fasting, and now you come to a town that's not fasting, you keep your private fast. Don't stop. But if you were not fasting because your town didn't, and you got to a town where they were fasting, then you have to act like a town. You can't be Mishayim and Tzibur. If they're fasting, you fast. Yeah. So what happens if you forgot? And he ate, he drank. So I just show up in that Tzibur. Right? Don't act like that in front of the tzibur. If they're all fasting, you shouldn't be, just because you came from a place that wasn't fasting, don't don't be flaunting. That's the word. Don't be acting like all pleasurable for yourself because you're coming from a place where they don't have this rule. And we have a pasuk that brings out the rise. It's a very amazing pasuk. The pasuk tells us in Parshas Miketz, Yaakov saying to his children, right? There's Pashup shot of Lama Tisra means is what? Why are you children of Yaakov not doing anything? We're having a big famine here. Why aren't you working hard to try to figure it out? So Yaakov is telling his children, no, Lama Tisra al tiru atzlachem kishahatim sevein lo b'fnei Esav lo b'fnei Yishmael kadesh lo yikanu b'chem. Right? Basically, Yaakov is saying that you guys are working out like you have a ton of stuff, but you don't have a ton of stuff. But you're making it out like you have a ton of stuff, so everyone's going to be jealous. So don't act in such a manner that's flaunting it. In this case, flaunting what they didn't actually have because they needed the provisions. Again, it's not the Pashup shot, but that is how the Gemara is darshaning it. Yeah. So now, once we already discussed that situation, we discussed another situation about the brothers, right? Where Yosef tells them after he reveals himself to them, he says, "Al tirgazu baderech," right? Don't get yourselves angry on the road. Amar Lezer, right? Right. So Yaakov says, don't flaunt, right? So they shouldn't be jealous of you, right? And then they're going to come attack us. Don't go fighting on the road because it was very likely they were going to fight. Once they realized that the whole plan of Yosef was wrong, who are they going to blame? Reuben could blame Yehuda and say, I wanted to save him, and Yehuda could blame this one. Shimon and Levi wanted to kill him. They're going to fight. So Yosef says to them, don't fight. Amar Blazer, Amar Lam Yosef, ask Yosef wasn't telling them, don't fight about me. He was telling them, don't fight in learning. Because maybe you're going to get too much into the learning and you're going to fight each other. And he says the Gemara. So in other words, the Pashup shot is don't fight about the situation that I became down to Egypt. But we're dashing it, don't fight about learning. So the Gemara says, "Hey, is that true? Rabbi Loi Bar Berecher, Shnei Tamid Chom Shem Halkim Adaraf, Ein B'nei Divrei Torah." If you have two Tamid Chom that were on the road and they're not learning, ruin the Seif, then they should burn. Sheneva Yi Heim Halchim, passing there by Elisha and Elio, V'div V'davar Hinei Rochav Eish V'sus Teish V'Yafili Ben Shneim Time V'dika Dibur Haleka Dibur Ruin the Seif. You see over there, they were mamash fighting and learning. And it's mashma that if they weren't fighting learning, they would have been burned. Like Kasha, Adal Mikas, you know, I have to stop over here. There's a difference between saying over your learning and being ma'ayin in your learning. Saying over your learning, you're not going to get angry on the road. You could do that. Be ma'ayin on your learning, you're getting into a very deep discussion. You could end up fighting. So that we don't want. All right, let's just stop here. Have you done that?